Here we are at the end of the year, and we finally have our new D&D adventure. It's interesting that we haven't had a full regular adventure in the main campaign setting of the Sword Coast since arguably Rime of the Frost Maiden more than 2 years ago. Since then, Wizards has focused on anthologies like Candlekeep Mysteries and Radiant Citadel, and adventures in other realms like Wild Beyond the Witchlight, Call of the Netherdeep, and Spelljammer. And the same is true here, Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen, and many thanks to Wizards of the Coast for sending these to us to review. This is a full, for D&D, adventure path that will take you from level 1 to 11, and it includes enough setting information to help you run your adventure in the specific region of the Dragonlance world that you'll need. As always, you've got the standard edition available everywhere, and the very Dark Souls looking special edition cover available at game stores exclusively. But now you can also buy a bundle that includes the standard edition plus the content on D&D Beyond, and there's a deluxe edition that also includes the accompanying board game Warriors of Krynn and a Game Master screen. Use a segmented timeline down below me to jump around in my review if there are any specific things you want to know. I'll keep my story spoilers in the adventure overview section so you can look for that. But I tend to kind of run hot and cold on D&D adventures, so I'm really curious to see where this new adventure is going to land to me and what it's going to bring to the table. So without further ado, let's crack open Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen. Before we jump in, our sponsor Hit Point Press has a Black Friday sale going on all month long, and they make some fantastic 5e accessories that are perfect for the D&D player in your life. Here are just some of the things that you can get discounts on this month only. They have decks of tarot-sized reference cards for just $10 each for things like conditions, monsters, NPCs, weapons, plus the deck of many things. You can get 10% off of my personal favorite third-party campaign setting and adventure book and box set, Humblewood. Learn more about that in the eye in the corner of your screen. There's also 10% off gorgeous animated spell cards, which make playing a caster like 50 times more fun, and 10% off the gorgeous Griffin Saddlebag book and cards to add a whole bunch of unique and fun magic items into your adventures. And they even have STL files to print your own minis at home, specifically for the Humblewood and Heckna campaign settings. Those are also 10% off. And on top of all that, you can use the code BF2022 to get an additional 5% off your order of $50 or more. Go check out the links below the video here to start your holiday shopping right now. I know I'm going to get a bunch of animated reference cards to hand out in my holiday grab bags. Let me know what you pick up, and many thanks to Hit Point Press for their continued support. Dragonlance is making its return in 5e with this book after some teases in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. It was initially developed back in 1984 by Laura and Tracy Hickman and Margaret Weiss. There have been dozens of Dragonlance novels and game modules and comics and video games and more over the years. The Dragonlance universe is expansive with a deep and rich in-universe history. I'm just going to give you the highlights here, and the book does a good job of providing you with enough information about the world for you to run the included campaign. But if you do want to learn more, you got a lot of options. Dragonlance is set on the world of Krynn, which at first glance isn't significantly different from Toril or Galarian or Exandria. It's still a medieval fantasy world with humans, elves, dwarves, and gnomes. The major differences are in the history and the deities of the world. The world has been through a number of ages, most recently a great cataclysm where the gods rained fire on the great city of Istar, whose leader was seeking to attain godhood himself. It's been a few centuries now since civilization as they knew it was decimated. The gods have seemingly faded away from the world, leaving the world's clerics powerless. Elves and dwarves retreated to their lands, letting hobgoblins and ogres and other monstrous races spread across the surface world. But humans and other civilizations have started to rebuild. Enter Tiamat, or as she's known on Krynn, Takesis. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Still known as the Dragon Queen, though. She was banished from the world over 1,000 years ago, but has been plotting her return since then. Kind of sounds familiar. She influenced her evil chromatic dragons to help aid her return, starting with capturing and corrupting the eggs of the good metallic dragons to develop her mutant army of so-called Draconians, who were first introduced into 5e and Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Now she has 5 dragon armies, one for each color, which she plans to unleash on the world to finally conquer Krynn so that she can properly return to the world. The War of the Lance has been going on for a number of years as our adventure begins. This is the story of the dragon army's strike into the nation of Solamnia, a land of knights and heroes. Now, I often complain that D&D books are woefully lacking in lore these days, making it a lot of work for the game master and the players to create a story that feels rooted in the real world, so to speak. In Spelljammer, for example, you may want to play a plasmoid, but you're given like next to no information about their culture or history or beliefs or traditions. I'm happy to say that Dragonlance does a much better job. The scope is necessarily small, focusing mostly on the main continent of Ansalon and the nation of Solamnia, but you get quite a lot of information about the dwarves, the elves, the gnomes, and the Kinder civilizations. The Kinder being a Dragonlance-specific race of magically enhanced gnomes. And of course, they are also made playable here. There are new organizations for the players to join and appropriate new backgrounds and feats and spells. Plus, there's a new sorcerer subclass, Lunar Sorcery. Each day you choose which phase of the moon you want to manifest, full, new, or crescent, and you get access to certain spells and abilities associated with each phase. There are also the Dragonlance-specific deities for your clerics, paladins, and other true believers, and yes, you can play a cleric in this adventure. Now, while there is enough lore here to run the adventure without having to invent everything yourself, I do wish Wizards would create a full lore book like they did for Ravnica and Theros and release it alongside a full adventure that takes place there. Again, Paizo is really good at doing that with Pathfinder, but we rarely get anything like that for D&D. Here's where we get into spoilery territory, so be careful. This section is for game masters to help you decide if this is an adventure for you and your group. If you're a player, jump ahead to my final thoughts using that timeline down below me. The campaign begins with something new. You get 3 Prelude mini-adventures that are meant for specific characters and classes, not necessarily everyone all at once. I'll go more into these in the next section, but it is a fun way to get your characters into the story. Once the Preludes get all the characters to level 2, they venture to the village of Vogler to attend the funeral of a mutual friend. Vogler is going to be important, because the connections the characters make here are going to be the motivating force for the rest of the adventure. Your PCs will need to care about these people and want to defend them. Check out my GM tips below to make sure that happens. You'll have the funeral and then a festival, because every D&D adventure has to have a festival, and it all culminates in an attack by the Red Dragon Army. This will be their first battlefield encounter, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And the rest of the first act involves a pretty open-ended scenario in which the PCs and the townsfolk discover the Red Dragon Army is preparing to take and occupy the town. The PCs will have to work with the local leadership to gain intelligence, to prepare defenses, and eventually plan an evacuation of the city. This chapter is really well done in giving the PCs the time and space to help grow their relationships with the important NPCs in town, while they're also under this massive threat that they can feel. And it's pretty open-ended as well, so the PCs can plan as they like, but there are NPCs that you as the game master can use to kind of nudge things in certain directions, though not every NPC leader agrees on what needs to be done. You'll also be given the option of running the invasion of the city using the board game. It doesn't really change the story in any appreciable way, but it does give the PCs an opportunity to earn some rewards and provide a little bit more context. I'll talk more about the board game later in this video. The PCs and the villagers escape to the city of Kalaman to start Act 2. Now, the city of Kalaman is prepared to offer the villagers refuge in exchange for the PCs joining up with the city's defense force, since the PCs have both the knowledge and the experience in dealing with the Red Dragon Army. It'll become more clear in this act also that there are certain NPCs among the Vogler refugees who are going to serve an antagonistic role in the story as well, as they'll frequently put their own needs ahead of the other townsfolk. In Act 2, the characters will be sent on various missions with the army to learn more about the opposing army and the threat that they pose. You can intersperse these with scenes from the village and the villagers to keep those connections going, but if you want to, you can also run some missions from the board game as well. They'll have to retake a captured fort, and they'll have to help out a doomed counter-assault as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. The characters will learn about one of the lurking big bads in the adventure too, and that's Lord Soth, a knight who had a chance to prevent the cataclysm but failed and is now cursed as a death knight. And longtime Dragonlance fans are gonna know exactly who Lord Soth is. He does get a CR19 stat block in the book and some pretty cool minis that we'll be showing off pretty soon on the channel here. But don't expect the PCs to face him directly in combat in this adventure. Use him like Darth Vader in A New Hope, a big bad who is too powerful to come face to face with. Lord Soth is on a mission from the Dragon Queen to raid a catacomb beneath the city to discover some ancient power, and the PCs will be giving chase. And along the way, they'll learn Soth's story. They'll also learn of an old flying city called the City of Lost Names, a city that was created by the king priest who was seeking that godhood and who had brought about that cataclysm. So the city itself was brought down by the combined might of the metallic dragons. And the PCs will also find a broken Dragonlance in this act, one of those fabled weapons that's capable of slaying dragons. Okay, you still with me? Act 3 now. Act 3 sees the characters following Soth into the northern wastes as Soth looks to raise the dead dragons who lie beneath that flying city's ruins to bring them into the Dragon Queen's service. Meanwhile, an expedition from the Red Dragon army is also heading in that direction to raise the city itself as a weapon of war. The PCs will have a small army with them too as they head north out of their city. Act 3 actually involves exploration, though it's relatively light exploration. There are some random encounters they can have, plus a few specific locations that will have encounters. Certain of those encounters will point the characters to other locations where they can learn more about the City of Lost Names and its history. When they finally locate the ruins of the city, they'll have to fight their way inside, of course, and you'll either be given the option of using the board game or running an encounter out of the book, and this is something you see a couple of times in this book. Either way, the PCs will end up infiltrating the ruins while the armies clash outside. So, Act 4 begins as a dungeon crawl through some caverns as they make their way toward those lost city ruins, learning more about the city's history as they go. The king priest built this city on an ancient dragon burial ground to harness that lingering draconic energy to build a flying city where he and his chosen nobles could live like gods and drink a lot and have hot tubs until the metallic dragons brought it all crashing down to the ground. They'll also learn the history of their broken Dragonlance that they found previously. This chapter also gives some characters the opportunity to gain full membership in the Mages of High Sorcery, which is hopefully the goal for at least one of the party members. Finally, they make it to the city proper where they have to contend with the expedition from the Red Dragon's army, including Lord Soth and his undead dragons. And one of their first steps will be reforging that Dragonlance, because you gotta have a Dragonlance. And the Dragonlance is a +3 lance or pike that does an additional 3d6 force damage to dragons and allows any dragon of your choice that you can see nearby to immediately use their reaction to make a melee strike. Eventually though, the enemy does cause the city to begin rising, though kinda not all at once, so the whole thing begins to just fall apart. The city's just tearing itself apart. The heroes have to find a way to escape with their lives. Meanwhile, Lord Soth has managed to harness that draconic energy, raising a citadel to the Dragon Queen into the heavens, which he plans to use in a final assault against that city of Kalaman. And in the final chapter, the heroes return to Kalaman to prepare the city for that Red Dragon army's final assault. The heroes have to forge a plan to infiltrate that flying citadel and bring it down from the inside. Again, you'll get the choice of either using the board game or proceeding with some encounters in the regular campaign. Once inside the citadel, they'll have to find a way to topple Lord Soth without confronting him in a direct attack, as he's, again, way too powerful for them to defeat in regular combat. Luckily, there's an artifact that they'll learn about somewhere in the Citadel, which they should be able to use to remove him from the encounter long enough for the heroes to bring that Citadel crashing down. And once that's done, the heroes will still have to confront the leader of the Red Dragon army, this time directly, because every good D&D campaign needs an epic final combat encounter. And the book ends with some appendices for new magical items and the stat blocks for certain allies and enemies in the story, including CR 10 and 14 lesser and greater death dragons, respectively, various kinds of draconians and dragonelles, and of course Lord Soth himself, who at CR 19 is deservedly the strongest foe in the book. You also get 3 sidekicks who can join the party to bring it up to 4 party members if for some reason you're a player down, whether it's for one session because someone can't make it or because you just have a smaller gaming group. You also get an advancement track for each of these sidekicks to get them from level 1 to 11. Level 1 to 11. You get essentially a rogue, a defensive warrior, and a caster/healer. I also have tips on how to use these characters in my GM tips section down below. And the book includes one of the most gorgeous world maps I've seen in a D&D book of the continent of Ansalon that you can hang on your game room wall. Let's talk about a few of the new innovations this adventure brings to the table. One thing I do appreciate about D&D adventures is that each one generally has something new and interesting that makes that particular adventure unique. And the big standout here is, of course, the board game Warriors of Krynn. Now, this all arrived just a couple of days ago, so I haven't had a chance to play through the game yet, but I have gone through the rules and the components. This is not some hastily thrown together board game developed by some Wizards of the Coast summer interns. They brought in 2 of the bigger names in the board game biz to develop Warriors of Krynn. You get Rob DeVoe, who pioneered the idea of legacy games. He developed Risk Legacy, Pandemic Legacy, Betrayal Legacy, which I didn't even know was a thing. He did Cthulhu Death May Die, Return to Dark Tower, and dozens and dozens of others. Now, this isn't a legacy game in that tradition. It's more of a standard campaign game. DeVoe has well more than 100 games to his credit, and his partner on this game was Stephen Baker, developer of Hero Quest, Axis and Allies Pacific, several other versions of Risk, and many, many others. So these 2 bring a lot of experience to the table, literally. The board game itself is a medium to heavyweight cooperative war game, but the war game unfolds alongside the individual heroic deeds of the PCs. So your players will most likely bring their PC minis to the board game, where they will have a very similarly made character to approximate their character's abilities in the RPG, and then play out the scenarios from their adventures. For example, the second mission has the PCs running around trying to rescue civilians as the dragon army attacks the town of Vogler. All the while, you also play out the combat between the 2 armies. So you'll also have champions, who are important NPCs in the adventure, who show up in the board game. The dungeon master can either take up a hero of their own and play alongside the heroes, since the board game doesn't technically need a game master, or they can kind of maintain that game master role and instead read the scenario stories and roll for the bad guys. Honestly, I think this is a really fun way for the DM to have their own heroic NPC in the story, I guess it's a PC in this case, who can be in the background of the main adventure but kind of step up when the board game is brought out. And the important beats of the story that take place during the board game scenarios are kind of scattered in the rulebook. So for example, on turn 1, you may have a story event that says go read entry 76. And then on turn 2, you have a next story event that says go read entry 25. So this allows the person reading the scenario to not get spoiled on what's going to happen next. The box also comes with 6 hero minis, which you can see here. They aren't pre-painted like we're used to, but they are done up to look basically kind of like statues, which is kind of cool. You can and probably should encourage your players to bring their own regular minis to the table instead to maintain consistency. There isn't any data yet on Board Game Geek, but according to the manufacturer, each session should take between 60 and 90 minutes to play. I'd set aside about 2 hours at least until everyone really gets familiar with it. At first read through though, this looks like a very solid game. If you don't have it and your players don't know it exists, I don't think they'll feel like there's something missing. But if you do have a group who might enjoy shaking up the regular game night with a tie-in board game, I think this one's really going to be satisfying, and it'll be a fun change of pace for the whole group. Now, if you and your gaming group aren't familiar with modern board games like Pandemic Legacy, Gloomhaven, Blood Rage, a lot of the ones you see behind me, this game may have a little bit of a learning curve. Now, I have a bunch of content I need to make for the channel this month, but if you're interested, I can try to do a full review of the board game after I get a few playthroughs in. I'm no Tom Vassell or Rado or Rodney Smith, but if that's something you'd be interested in, let me know and I will do my level best. You can get the board game as part of the deluxe edition, which also comes with the beautiful foil covered book, and this may be my favorite D&D cover in quite a while. It is a little hard to see the foil in the video, but it's there, I promise. And it comes with a DM screen which contains your usual conditions and the like, and also some random encounter tables and other info specific to this campaign. The DM screen is nice, but certainly not necessary to enjoy the game, and if you buy the deluxe edition from Wizards, it also comes with the D&D Beyond content. There were two other new features that drew my attention in the adventure. First, you had the Preludes. These were those 3 little encounters that help set the stage and sort of introduce the world for your PCs. And you probably shouldn't have all your players play all the Preludes. The first one is designed for characters who receive their powers from the gods, so paladins, clerics, druids, and maybe a few others. And the second is designed for casters who may want to eventually join the prestigious Mages of High Sorcery. And the third one is for all the characters, and it'll introduce them to the dangers that they face in the coming war. On paper, I love these little intro adventures and encounters like this that players get to play one-on-one with the game master. I try to do this with most of my campaigns, but I usually have to write them myself. It gives the player a chance to learn a little bit more about their character and get comfortable in their skin before they get introduced to the other players and other characters. And it gets people established into the world, and it gives them a player history, a character history that they can share with the other PCs or not as the adventure gets started. The only thing I don't like about these particular Preludes is that they're very, very linear. To me, the key to a good adventure is giving the players very tough, meaningful choices to make. And what I would have liked to have seen here is the players being presented with a choice in these Preludes that will set them on one path or another. Now, often in adventures, these choices are a bit of smoke and mirrors, when it seems like the PCs choose a path, but they ultimately kind of end up in the same place. And that's fine if it's designed well, if it's kind of a little smoke and mirrors there. But here, there really just isn't any choice at all to make. And I think this makes the Preludes a little bit less impactful. So if I ever run this, I may try to change these Preludes up a little bit to get that same information and feeling across, but maybe in a more exciting way. The other innovation isn't huge, but I like it. It's called a battlefield encounter. And it's basically a regular combat encounter with a few extra ingredients. First, there's a border around the edges of the map called the fray, usually about 15 feet across. In the fray and beyond it is the abstracted overall larger battle going on. If the PCs or the enemies enter the fray, they're subject to additional effects, generally damage from the other ongoing battles. It's a small touch, but it gives you a way to run a manageable encounter with your players in the midst of a larger overall conflict in a way that feels a bit more exciting and dangerous. Battlefield encounters also have random events that happen each round to simulate the chaos of war, like new enemies or new allies may be added, someone may lend moral support, giving somebody advantage, all sorts of things can happen depending on the roll of the die, and it changes from encounter to encounter. Now, this is an innovation that I just unreservedly love. It keeps combat fresh and engaging and unpredictable without loading up the dungeon master with too many new things that they have to keep track of. If you do plan to run this adventure, here are my GM tips. Do not follow the book's advice about having the characters all showing up at the town of Vogler for a friend's funeral. No, the PC's connections to this town are the driving motivation for this campaign, so those connections need to be strong. Instead, have your players create characters who are a part of this town, who either grew up there or moved there quite some time ago. Not only that, have the players help you create the town. Share the map of the town with them, let them pick out which house is theirs, let them establish other locations that are important to their characters, maybe a shop where they work, their favorite restaurant, a school where they attend, the park where they had their first date. Let them make their own NPCs for the town that are more important to their story. And here's where you can work some magic. Don't tell your players about any of the book NPCs in town as they're working through their own creativity, but look for ways to merge the characters that they create with important NPCs in the story, like the mayor, some of the store owners, their departed friend Squire Becklin, the local antagonist Baccharis and his father, the leader of the local mercenary troop Cudgel, and there's also several others. So for example, you may ask certain players to think about who might have been one of their rivals in town growing up and why. If someone has a great idea, merge that antagonistic character with Baccharis, who is the antagonistic character in the book, and use the name that your players came up with. If the players came up with an antagonist named Biff, Just give Biff all the things that Bakaris does in the adventure and tweak them as you need to. And I guarantee you, your players are going to be way more emotionally invested in what Biff does than a character that they did not have a hand in creating. They have a history with Biff, maybe going all the way back to elementary school. Bakaris is just some bloke they met yesterday at the funeral. You can subtly guide the character's creation process with your players and have them give you seeds for the important NPCs in the adventure. Also look for opportunities to use the stat blocks in the back of the book for the sidekicks and incorporate those with characters that the players create. And that way you're going to have a few more meaningful characters who can step in if you need them to fill out a party one session when a player can't make it, or if someone's main character is off doing something else and you still want that player to participate in whatever's happening at the table right now. Remember that the players don't always have to play the same character every single time. Be flexible when it makes sense to. And if worst comes to worst, those sidekick characters that the players will hopefully have had a hand in creating might be good backup characters if everything goes pear-shaped. Now, this adventure could potentially have quite a few NPCs for you to keep up with. I recommend making an index card or a computer document of some sort to keep track of each NPC's relationship and the developments for that character. In the last few acts of the adventure here, you're going to have the opportunity to bring some of those NPCs along when the PCs go out to find that lost city, that one that crashed. And you may want to give each player the option of picking an NPC or two that they want to bring along if it makes sense. The adventure is largely about the cost of war, and the most important part of that cost is the people in these characters' lives. Letting your players have as much ownership over them as possible is just going to make the adventure that much more meaningful to them. Now I'm going to try to keep this more or less spoiler free. If you're looking for a more traditional D&D adventure, one that feels a little bit more grounded and gritty, Shadow of the Dragon Queen will probably serve you well. And I think this board game is going to be a fun addition to the campaign too. Again, it's very much not required, but it seems like a solid game from very accomplished creators, and it can mix things up for your campaign while continuing to push the narrative forward. You as a game master may want to do a little extra work to bring what happens in the board game back to the campaign and the RPG in a meaningful way, but I think you can more or less run it as written and have a great time. And it is a great way for the game master to actually play a character in the campaign alongside the other players, which is kind of fun. Now, every good campaign needs some good villains, and this one delivers in that department too. You have 4 or 5 pretty good antagonists at different parts of the story, and they're generally introduced early too, so they feel impactful, and that's something that other adventures sometimes have trouble with. Speaking of other adventures, a lot of them can be rather narratively messy or feel incomplete, needing you as a game master to tie plot threads together and to find artificial ways to push the action forward, and I don't think that's going to be a problem here. This adventure feels pretty tight and well developed. My motto is give me meaningful choices, and I think this adventure largely does that. It does give room for the characters to feel like they have agency. Many parts are open-ended and provide guidance for allowing the PCs to make plans and handle things the way they see fit. Now, there aren't really branching story paths, something that I really like, but that's really hard to pull off in adventures like this. So the characters are usually going to end up in the same place at different points in the story, but how they get there is going to vary group to group. And if you follow my advice in the GM tips section, you're going to have a lot of emotionally invested chess pieces that you can make use of in the campaign. Next, these D&D books need real map packs, and I cannot believe that Wizards of the Coast is not making them. This book has a ton of gorgeous battle maps, and it is really hard to get those down on the table yourself. Beadle and Grimm's editions are the only real way to do it unless you have access to a poster-sized color printer. Wizards flirted with map packs in the past, but never really got it right. I would love to see a beautiful paper map pack for major encounters in this adventure. It would make being a new game master so much easier. And the only other real criticism I have is that the adventure doesn't really give you any guidance on continuing the story at the end. It teases another threatening army, but there's really nothing more than that. And as we know, D&D rarely does high-level content. One thought I had is that you might be able to use this book, Kingdoms and Warfare, by Matt Koval and his team, to continue the story in a really interesting way. The players may gain leadership positions in the place they end up, and you could transition the war portion of the game to the rules presented in this book after you finish all the scenarios in the board game. Or if you wanted to, you could look into using Kingdoms and Warfare alongside Shadow of the Dragon Queen. That would take a lot of work by their game master, but it could be really rewarding. If you're interested in seeing a review of Kingdoms of Warfare, let me know down below. I'll have a link down there where you can pick it up. It's also going to be in that doohickey. In fact, we always have a ton of useful links down there to everything we talk about, so it's really worth checking out that doohickey if you're interested in anything we've discussed. I'm going to start rating D&D adventures because, I don't know, that's fun. People love ratings. Everybody loves it when hundreds of hours of hard work and creativity and love gets boiled down to a single number. So for me, Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen is a 4 out of 5 in my book. If the subject matter appeals to you, a grounded, war-based campaign, then I think you're going to fully enjoy this adventure. I haven't played the board game yet, but I think it's going to be very much worth considering if your gaming group likes that idea. Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen will be available on December 6th. There are so many versions available. The regular edition of the book is available for $49.95, and the bundle with the standard book and the D&D Beyond content is $59.94 from the Wizards website with free domestic shipping. The deluxe edition with the Warriors of Krynn board game, the DM screen, and the foil edition of the cover is $139.95. And if you order it directly from Wizards, it also unlocks the content for you on D&D Beyond. Both of those D&D Beyond bundles will open the content for you right away. The D&D Beyond edition alone is $29.99, and that won't open, I believe, until launch day. And of course, the special edition will be available exclusively at game stores. You can also pick up the Warriors of Krynn board game by itself for about $60 to $65. We're of course going to have a lot more Dragonlance coverage coming up as we get our hands on the upcoming mini set by WizKids, so be sure you're subscribed to see that. Also, don't forget to check out the Black Friday sale going on all month long at Hit Point Press, and remember to use the code BF2022 at checkout for more discounts. If you found this video helpful, hitting that like button down there and subscribing to the channel will help us grow and improve. And you can always find us here on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Until next time, stay safe, have fun, love each other, and I will see you next time at the Gallant Goblin.